By Keith Bradshaw, New York Times, May 14, 2018. Washington. After weeks of threatening China with punitive restrictions and stiff tariffs, President Trump is now siding with his more moderate economic advisers and looking to strike a deal to avert a devastating trade war. The administration is considering easing up on one of China's largest telecommunications companies, ZTE, in exchange for China agreeing to buy more U.S. products and lift its own crippling restrictions on U.S. agriculture. People familiar with the deliberations said. Trump defended the shift in a tweet Monday, saying that ZTE buys a big percentage of individual parts from U.S. companies and that the new stance was reflective of the larger trade deal we are negotiating with China and my personal relationship with President Xi Jinping of China. The move is a sharp reversal from just 2 weeks ago, when the views of anti-China advisers within the Trump administration appeared ascendant. Trump, spurred on by Robert Lighthizer, the U.S. trade representative, and Peter Navarro, a top trade advisor, was pushing the United States toward a potential showdown with the Chinese over its economic behavior, a clash that had put many U.S. companies at risk. Get talking points in your inbox, an afternoon recap of the day's most important business news, delivered weekdays. Thank you for signing up. Sign up for more newsletters here during a trip to Beijing early this month. Top U.S. officials handed their Chinese counterparts a lengthy list of demands to dramatically change their trade practices and curtailed the state's role in the economy. The list, which included cutting their trade surplus with the United States by $200 billion, halting subsidies to advanced manufacturing, and slashing their tariffs to the same level as the United States, took the Chinese by surprise, according to people familiar with the visit, and appeared to further chill relations between the two economic giants. Trump now appears, at least for the moment, to be walking back from the tougher stance and seeking a quicker, and easier, resolution of trade conflicts with the Chinese. The president's reconsideration of sanctions imposed on ZTE stems in part from Beijing's demand that the United States consider lifting the penalties before a visit by Liu He, a Chinese vice premier, who was expected to arrive in Washington this week for negotiations aimed at resolving the simmering trade conflict between the two countries. The Chinese made clear that Liu's visit was conditional on discussing the sanctions. But the more moderate approach also stems from the more market-friendly views of two of Trump's favorite advisers, Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin and Larry Kudlow, who heads the National Economic Council. Mnuchin has taken the lead role in recent weeks in pushing to resolve tensions and avoid potentially damaging tariffs and investment restrictions. He pressed for top officials to travel to China to try to resolve trade tensions, and helped fuel the president's focus on a deal revolving around reducing the United States' trade deficit with China, which Trump frequently denounces. Secretary Mnuchin has been pushing for a more conciliatory view to China for this entire period. Certainly since the launch of the 301 investigation. Derek Scissors, a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, said, referring to the section of trade law that authorized an investigation into whether China had illegally obtained U.S. intellectual property. We see evidence that the Treasury Department does not want to impose investment sanctions on China as required by the original 301 findings. A senior Treasury Department official said Mnuchin has had conversations with Trump and Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross in recent days about China's ZTE concerns. However, the official said a review of the Commerce Department's action against ZTE was not a precondition for trade talks. Among the Trump economic officials, Mnuchin has been more encouraged by China's expressions of willingness to address the trade imbalance between the two countries and, because of his national security responsibilities, he considers the implications for North Korean nuclear talks when engaged in trade negotiations. The Trump administration threatened ZTE's existence as a business last month when the Commerce Department ordered a 7-year halt in U.S. shipments of computer microchips and software at the heart of most of ZTE's gear. The move hit one of the United States' biggest telecom companies, Qualcomm, which lost the ability to export semiconductors to ZTE, one of its biggest customers. In China, Qualcomm's plan to acquire NXP Semiconductors had been stalled by a prolonged antitrust review, which many saw as retaliation for U.S. trade moves. The Commerce Department's Bureau of Industry and Security accused ZTE of violating U.S. sanctions by selling to Iran and North Korea and then covering up the exports and rewarding the executives involved. ZTE has acknowledged it violated sanctions, but blamed the actions on poor internal controls rather than a deliberate defiance of the U.S. legal system. ZTE, a 75,000-employee business that makes smartphones and cell phone tower equipment, began shutting down operations last week after it was unable to find alternative suppliers. But in a surprise tweet Sunday, the president held out the possibility of a reversal for the company. President Xi of China and I are working together to give massive Chinese phone company, ZTE, a way to get back into business fast. Too many jobs in China lost. Commerce Department has been instructed to get it done. The president's tweet provoked a swift and harsh response from lawmakers on both sides of the aisle. I hope this isn't the beginning of backing down to China, Senator Marco Rubio, Republican of Florida, wrote on Twitter on Monday. While Chinese companies have unrestricted access to U.S. market and protection of our laws, many U.S. companies have been ruined after #China blocked market access or stole their intellectual property. Senator Chuck Schumer of New York, the Democratic leader, said in a statement, "This leads to the greatest worry, which is that the president will back off on what China fears most, a crackdown on intellectual property theft, in exchange for buying some goods in the short run. That's a bad deal if there ever was one." A White House spokeswoman walked back the tweet on Sunday, saying that the president expected Ross to exercise his independent judgment on the ZTE case. On Monday, Raj Shah, a White House spokesman, denied that accommodating China's concerns represented a broken promise by Trump to protect U.S. interests, saying that the relationship with China was complex. "He's been tough and he's confronted them," Shah said, "but on this issue, he's asked the Secretary of Commerce to take a look at it." In remarks at the National Press Club on Monday, Ross said that he expected Liu to bring up ZTE when he traveled to Washington for talks this week, but that the company's fate should not be linked to the trade negotiations. "Our position has been that is an enforcement action separate from trade," Ross said. "ZTE did do some inappropriate things, they admitted to them." He added, "The question is, are there alternative remedies to the one that we had originally put forward?" Trump's offer to throw a lifeline to ZTE found a receptive audience in Beijing on Monday, a development that could help him strike deals on thorny issues like trade and North Korea. The Chinese reaction underscored the importance that Beijing has placed on ZTE's survival, and the company's travails have encapsulated the worries among Chinese leaders that their country depends too much on U.S. technology. "We very much appreciate the positive attitude of the U.S. side to the issue of the ZTE Corporation, and are maintaining close communication with the U.S. on the implementation of specific details," Liu Kang, a spokesman for the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, said at a daily briefing Monday afternoon. Hu Zijin, chief editor of Global Times, a newspaper owned by the Chinese Communist Party, used his widely followed account on the social media service Weibo to add, "No matter if the previous sanction was a card in Washington's concerted move for a trade war on China, the newest decision is a good one." Trump's move could also help calm tensions with Beijing before his summit meeting next month in Singapore with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Xi has considerable power to help or disrupt a deal, given North Korea's economic dependence on China. Still, defending ZTE in a dispute involving Chinese exports to North Korea has been politically awkward for Beijing. Chinese officials believe that their country has been helpful in enforcing international sanctions against North Korea, said one senior Chinese government advisor who spoke on condition of anonymity because of political sensitivities. In the days after the ZTE penalty was announced last month, Beijing did not try to defend the company's ties to Iran or North Korea. ZTE was also castigated in social media by the general public for having spent so little on research and development that it was completely dependent on the United States.